Hi, my name is Judy. I was a TWA flight attendant and in-flight services instructor for 23 years. I am pleased that you're meeting me now as a volunteer at our museum. I'm excited to tell you about this display case and in particular this first panel that traces the beginnings of this great TWA profession. Our museum is proud of our extensive collection of items related to TWA's flight attendants. Our museum's archives maintains and preserves dozens of uniforms and thousands of items related to this most special group of TWA employees. We're pleased to display some of these items here in this case. In reality, this case is much more than just a display of flight attendant uniforms, photographs, and artifacts. In its own way, it tells the history of TWA from a very unique perspective. It also gives us a look into the social and cultural history of our company, our industry, and of society as a whole. Quite fittingly, our look begins with the story of 22 young women who in 1935 gathered here at this very airport to begin work as TWA's first hostesses. They're standing together in that middle picture in front of you, just below the glass shelf. How they got to that point is a pretty interesting story. When TWA formed in 1930, there were no flight attendants. The first people to serve passengers in the cabin were men known as couriers. They served passengers on TWA's predecessor airline, Transcontinental Air Transport. They really were jacks of all trade. In addition to cabin service, they loaded baggage and even picked up passengers and mail bound for the airport. The Great Depression caused TWA to eliminate the courier positions, and cabin service became the part-time job of the co-pilot. As TWA got larger, the need was seen for more predictable and comprehensive in-flight passenger service. TWA's president, Jack Fry, felt this need would be best served by recruiting young, educated, and charming women who displayed poise and could handle the rigors of flying. In order to meet these requirements, TWA insisted that they be registered nurses. While they were not expected to administer medical care, it was felt being a nurse showed a young woman to be intelligent, resourceful, and good at interacting with people. It also should be noted that flying in 1935 was sometimes a turbulent and shaky experience. It was thought knowing a nurse was on board would help nervous and/or airsick passengers feel a little better. In addition to being a nurse, young women were required to be between 21 and 26 years of age, weigh between 100 and 118 pounds, and stand no taller than 5 feet 6 inches. And they had to be unmarried. Speaking of marriage, many hostesses quickly found spouses among passengers and fellow TWA employees. While they were initially allowed to remain employed after marriage, a significant percentage did resign once they wed. And just a quick word about the title of hostess. It was chosen to convey a welcoming feeling to passengers. That title would remain for over 30 years until it was replaced with the designation of cabin or flight attendant in 1970. There are so many things in front of you to look at. It's impossible to point them all out, so we'll cover just some of the more interesting items. And don't forget, you can pause your audio device at any time if you spot something specific that attracts your further interest. If you visited our first 2 stops on the tour, you'll recall that the Douglas DC-2, which was put into service in 1934, ushered in a new era of fast and comfortable airplanes. TWA's first hostesses were trained to work on the DC-2. That's a model of one on the center of the glass shelf. In the front of the case, on the lower left, are some of the amenities offered to passengers in those early days. Hot food and beverages were served starting in 1936 and kept warm in canisters. You can see some of them to the right. And we can't forget gum. The DC-2 and other planes of that era were not pressurized, so when you descended down from 10,000 feet of altitude, Chewing gum helped to relieve that uncomfortable pressure in your ears. Now, let's talk about the uniform at this stop. On your left is the winter uniform that was introduced in 1938. This actually was the second generation of uniforms worn by TWA hostesses. You can see pictures of the very first uniforms on the left just above the 1938 uniform. And that enthusiastic young lady giving you a salute in the picture all the way to the right is also wearing the first uniform. It's white because it was worn during the summer. The winter uniform was gray in color as seen in that first picture of the original 22 hostesses. Back to the 1938 uniform on the left. It turned out to become quite recognizable thanks to an artist named George Petty. He was famous for his illustrations of women, popularly known as Petty Girls. In 1941, TWA hired George Petty to illustrate a TWA hostess for purposes of advertising and publicity. The result was the TWA Petty Girl. A copy of the illustration is on the wall to the left of the uniform. This first group of 22 young women were truly pioneers, embarking on a career that was largely unknown. One of those women was Ruth Rhodes, who was TWA's first chief hostess. In 1937, she was quoted as saying that women needed more adventure in their lives. She described being a TWA hostess as one who flew high above the earth, raced against time, and realized that the world, after all, was a small place. Ruth was right. And as you'll see throughout this case, the world kept getting smaller as time went on. I've enjoyed sharing the beginnings of our story about TWA's flight attendants. I hope you'll continue along the tour of this case to find out more.